Okay, so what we did up until now was we focused on getting the flight table to insert, update, and delete information. And what we're going to do now is we're gonna manipulate the user table. So the the name, the email address, all those things that went into a user along with the flight number, we're going to manipulate that now. So what we need to do is we have a number of approaches to this. We can create a separate form to do this. We could have a button, that says update user, launch a new form, and do it that way. Uh, why don't we just take the tab panel and put this inside its own panel, and then have the second tab panel update the user info. I think a user would prefer that more. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this off, and we're going to look for a tab panel. Now, before we do that, well, actually what we need to do is we need to actually delete everything from here first, which is kind of a scary thing because we just did all this work. But we're not going to lose it. What we're going to do is we're going to just select everything. Right? So make sure everything's selected. Right? I'm going to do a Control X to cut. It'll still be there when we paste it. What we're going to do first is bring in the panel. So search for tab, and we have a tab control. We'll bring the tab control in and resize it to be the entire size of the form. All right. Now when we do this, we'll find that maybe our stuff won't fit as nicely, but first thing we'll do is we'll do a Control V now. And everything is back where it should be, except that things look like they're cut off a little bit. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of playing around with this. So I'm going to, before clicking on anything, I'm just going to move everything a bit down. But then I know my view flights gets cut off, so I have to now increase the size of my form, and therefore increase the size of the tab panel. There, so we have all of our items inside the panel. And if we run this, just to see what happens here inside the tab control, you'll hear me use tab panel and tab control. It's really tab control, but I'm using it interchangeably here. But this will pop up, and so we'll have tab page 1 and tab page 2. So what we want to do is we want to put all the user-related stuff here, which we'll do in a moment. Right now, let's configure the tab control. So me clicking on here, I can't, and I don't want to double click, I can't edit this text here for these tabs. So what we have to do is making sure that the tab is highlighted, right? It's called tab control. We'll leave it as tab control. But I'm going to scroll down to tab pages. That's the property here. It says collection. It's probably a dictionary. And if I click on collection, I see ... and I click on that. Now this control pops up, or this window pops up. And so now on the side here, I can go and configure each one. So starting with the text, I'm going to call this flight info. Right? And if I click on the second tab page 2, I'll change that from tab page 2 to user info. Right? And then maybe I'll change the ID just to be consistent, because it still shows up as tab page 2 and tab page 1. So maybe I'll change it to user info without a space and flight info without a space. All right. So I have my variable names changed. I have my text changed. And then I can hit OK. I can add more tabs. I'm not going to add more tabs. So now we hit OK. Now what we want to do is we want to add, we're going to make a very similar looking GUI to what we saw here. And you know, it's not really the best GUI because there's probably a better way we can do it, but consistency is good. If we're going to sell this as our GUI, we don't want to change it in the user side. We want to keep it consistent looking. All right? So you're going to see that we're going to put together a very similar GUI to what we see here. So we'll start off by bringing in some labels. All right? Now I'm just going to do Control C and Control V. All right? So put a label here. And one more. All right, and I'm not going to change the IDs for these labels. I'm just going to edit the text. So this first label, it's going to be name. Second label will be email. Third name, or third label, address. I think one too many S's. Is it? No. Next label, age. Last one will be flight num. Okay. Then we'll add text boxes next to each of them. The last one being a combo box. So I'm going to search for a text box. Bring one over. And then do a Control C and Control V for the others, except for the last. All right. The last one will be a combo box. Before that, let's configure this. So I'm going to name each of them. So the first one will be TB name. Next one, TB email. Third one, TB address. Last one, TB age. All right, so name, email, address, and age. Now we can bring in our combo box. And I'm going to do Control C and Control V, copy paste, because I'm going to need another combo box anyway. I'll put that in the middle around here. Okay. Let's name our combo boxes. So this one's going to be called CMB. Now I have to be very careful because I already have a CMB flight, or I might already have one. Maybe I'll call this one CMB user flight. Okay. This one, we'll call it CMB user. Okay, so we have our combo boxes in here. Let's add some buttons. So the same deal as before. We'll have like an add new up here, and then we'll have an update and delete. Okay, so start with this one. This will be, now we gotta be careful. We can't just say TB add, or sorry, BTN add. We already have that. Maybe we'll say BTN user add. And then button 2 will be BTN user update. Third one, BTN user delete. Okay, so add, update, and delete, but we're not going to use add, update, and delete because we already used them in the first tab. So we'll use BTN user add, BTN user update, and BTN user delete. But we still have to change the text accordingly, so you want to go ahead and do that too. So this will be delete. Update. Add new. Okay, so very similar to what we have. Oh, we still need a button at the bottom, so we'll add another button here for refresh. So I'll put this text as refresh. And it'll be called BTN user refresh. Only thing left to do is our data grid view. So we'll bring in a data grid view. And we'll leave the default name of data grid view 2. Okay, so we have our GUI completed. Let's create all the event handlers. So we only need event handlers in this case for the buttons. So I'm going to double click on every button and create them now. Just get them out of the way. I'm not creating event handlers for anything else. There. So I have all my event handlers out of the way. Okay, now I'm going to do Control S to save this form. And now we're going to start by just trying to get this grid view and these combo boxes to display. What I want to show in this combo box here is the flight information. The flight information already exists in the flight table. All right, so we're going to populate this one easily because it's already done inside refresh data. And this, we're going to get it to list the user's names, and its selected values will be the user IDs. All right, and this will of course just show us the entire table. Okay, so let's start with refresh. And the thing is that we've already done a lot of the heavy lifting inside refresh data. Right, so why don't we add extra code to refresh data to do the user stuff at the same time. So first thing I do with this refresh is just put refresh data in here. Okay, so the user refresh method will have refresh data. Okay. Now I'm going to go to refresh data itself. I'm going to modify this code a little bit. In fact, let's go full screen so it's easier to read. There we go, refresh data. Let's start at the beginning. We have all of our stuff here. This is related to our flight. Now, we're going through, we're doing our query. We did a select star from flight info. We updated the data source for our data grid view. We got our combo box to work. Now, why don't we put this information, or why don't we take the information here and add this to the drop down or the combo box for the user side. So before doing reader close, I'm going to add a few more lines of code here. First thing I'm going to do is say cmb user flight dot display member is equal to, it's going to be flight num as well. So I'm going to use the flight number. In fact, earlier we used airline. I didn't like that, so I'm going to change this to flight num as well. So after display member, we'll say cmb user flight dot value member will be ID. Right? And cmb user flight dot data source is equal to dt. Okay? So now at this point, I have just piggybacked off of the refresh data, just got this other new combo box to display the same information. So this helps us a lot. Now, let's look at what we're doing here. So we've done a select star from flight info. Let's do a select star from user, right? Now we want to do stuff from the user info side. So let's do reader.close. The connection is still open. So why don't we do another query while we're at it? So I'm going to just go down here. All right. And I'm not going to close the connection. I'm going to say query is equal to select star from user info. So that's my new query. Select star from user info. And I'll just say cmd dot command text is equal to query. Now I can go ahead and execute this query. I don't have to reopen the connection. It's already open still. So I'll just say reader, because I still have the data reader. I'm done with it. I'm done with the data reader from the query above. I'm just going to say reader is equal to cmd dot execute reader and convert that reader info into a data table. So I'll say dt, I'll just kill it by saying dt is equal to new data table, and then dt.load for reader. All right, same motions that are above. If I scroll up just a little bit, just so we don't lose the code we just wrote, we basically have all this code here. So reader, execute reader, new data table, dt load. Now I can go ahead and populate the rest of the stuff I need. And so now we're going to take this information and actually plug it into the new data grid view and the new combo box we just created. So the data grid view is pretty easy to work with. We'll just say data grid view 2 dot data source is equal to dt, right? So that's easy. Combo box needs a little bit extra work, which we saw above. So we're going to say cmb user dot display member is equal to, we'll use the person's name. So name. CMB user dot value member is equal to ID, and CMB user dot data source is equal to DT. And now we can close the reader. Alright, so if I run this thing, alright, so everything is fine with our flight. Let's go to user. We see our grid view is populated with all kinds of users, right? Our grid view, our drop down, our combo box, sorry, has all of our users here. And our flight info is all populated here, right? We made that slight change to flight info over here, so it now just shows flight numbers instead of airlines. So more flexibility. So at this point, we've gotten stuff to read. The next step, and we've got refresh going as well. The next step now is to get add new, update, and delete to work. So now we'll start with delete. So I'm going to close this. And we'll go full screen on this. We're going to jump straight into the delete method. So we have btn user delete. It's a little bit easier to work with. So first step is to get the user ID, which we'll get from the combo box, right? So we're going to say int uid is equal to convert dot to int 32 for CMB user dot selected value. Then we can go ahead and set up our connection, right? So we'll just do con dot connection string is equal to con string, and we'll say CMD is equal to con dot create command. Okay. Then we know that everything will go inside a try catch finally, so let's build out those blocks. So we'll say try catch we'll do handle exception here, and finally we'll do a dispose. So cmd.dispose con.close and a refresh data. Okay. Now, all you have to do is just write the code for the delete query. So we'll say string query is equal to delete from user info where ID equals and then plus UID. And then we'll say cmd.commandText is equal to query. And we can go ahead and open and execute. So we'll say con.open and cmd.execute scalar. And we'll throw a message box to say successful. Because again, if it gets to this line, it passes this last line, then it's successful. So we'll say message box dot show delete successful. And we'll say success. And then we'll say message box buttons.ok and message icon.information. So we delete is done. We're not going to test it just yet. What I want to do is I want to add some users and test those users. So we're going to jump into add and update and get those working. But what we're going to do is we're going to streamline add and update. So there's a lot of commonalities between adding and update. So the first thing we're going to do is, if we look at add and update for the previous table, let's start with update here. Update, we start off with pulling out the information from the text boxes and stuff. We did an if to check to see if there was any empty info. Then we went ahead in the else and did our query, right? So we did a create command, open, execute scalar, message box successful. Now, and we did a handle exception, and finally, if we look at add, same code except, so same code except for the query. Really, the query is the only difference here. So why don't we just break this up into two possibilities here. So let's start by creating a new method. I'm going to do this closer to add and update. So we have add, and user updates. Just above user add, I'm going to create a new method called, will be private void. We'll call it add update user. And we'll pass in the query. So string query. It'll do the work. And all we're going to do inside of here is put that core code that goes along with running the query itself. So we'll say con.connectionString is equal to constring, and we'll say cmd is equal to con.createCommand. And then we'll throw in our try, catch, and finally. And finally do the usual things. It'll just say cmd.dispose, con.close, and refresh data. So that'll be our catch. And finally. And then we just have to handle the try. Try will be the same 3 lines we've been doing over and over again. So cmd.commandText is equal to query. We'll say con.open. cmd.execute scalar. And let's put on a message box dot show. Now, we could specify, we usually have been specifying add or update is successful. We'll just say query successful. Alright, so this is half the battle here. This is the add update user. It's all generic now. So all we're doing here is just calling the basic core commands. The other half of the battle was to basically check to see if there was invalid input, right? And then to create the query string. So insert into or update, whichever one. So we'll put that into its own method, because the if statement that's involved in checking for bad input, it's the same stuff. So what we're going to do is create a new method above. I'm going to say private. Now I'm going to say private string, because I'm going to return back a string. Call it validate and generate query, passing in string q. Now I'm passing in a query. I'm passing in a string and I'm returning a string. I want to pass in which type of query it was, so I'm going to pass in either the word insert or the word update. I'll pass in one of the two. That way we know which query to deal with later on in this method. But you'll see what I mean in a moment. First step is to just retrieve the data and validate. So we'll say string name is equal to tb name.text, string email tb email.text, string address is equal to tb address.text, and string age is equal to tb age dot text. All right. Okay, so what we're going to say if name is empty string or email is empty string. Basically, if they're all empty strings. Or address is empty string, or age is empty string. Then we'll do our message box, no text box can be empty. String caption is equal to error. And then we'll say message box.show. All right, so we've done our error checking. Now the other part is basically creating our query here. So we'll do that inside the else. So we'll say else. Now we're going to provide inside this argument q we'll provide either the word insert or update. So let's check to see if it's either one of them. So we'll say if q.starts with insert, and I'll put the else, because it'll be update. It'll be either insert or update. So then we'll start with saying q plus equals opening quote. Now, we're going to provide the word insert into this string. So I want to leave a space just in case if I forget to put a like insert space or update space. So we don't have like insert into as one word or update set as one, or update table name as one word. So I want to be careful of that. So I'm going to say space into user info values. And I'm going to open the round bracket, open the single quote, and then I'm going to say plus name plus opening double, and then close the single quote, comma, open the single quote. I'll go on new line and say plus email plus, close that single quote for email, comma, open single quote, and then say plus address plus, close the single quote, comma, open single quote, plus age. Now actually age is an int, so we don't need the single quote here. So I'm going to take that out. I'll go a new line and say plus, opening the double quote, but I'm not going to close any single quotes because we never opened one. Just go straight into comma, and then close the double quote, say plus. I'm going to provide my flight number, which will be convert.toInt32 for CMB user flight dot selected value. Right? But I have to say plus and close off the round bracket. Alright? A bit of a tricky query again, just like the insert was. I think update's even worse. So for update, we'll say q plus equals, and then we'll say space. So we would say update, that'll be the word that's provided. So we'll say user info set name equals, open the single quote, and say plus name plus, and then close that single quote, comma, email equals, open that single quote. I'll go on a new line and say plus email plus, close that single quote, say comma, address equals, open that single quote, and say plus address plus, close that single quote, comma, age equals, don't need a quote there, single quote, so let's go a new line and say plus age plus, and then comma, flight num equals, and then plus, I'll put the plus on a new line for consistency, convert.toInt32 CMB user flight dot selected value, Now, gotta be careful. We're not done, so we gotta say where. So we're gonna say plus where ID equals, and then plus convert to int32 for CMB user dot selected value. And that's our query for update. Right? Now we'll just return Q. So I'm going to go to the very last curly down here just above it and say return Q. Okay, so now we have these two methods, add update user. We have our validate and generate query methods. So the question is, how do we use them? So let's go down to add and update, the button click methods. So we have btn add user click and btn update user click. And now we're going to use these methods. So we're going to say, starting with add, we'll say string query is equal to validate and generate query. We'll pass in insert space, and then we'll say add update user, passing in query. And that's it. For update, we'll say string query is equal to validate and update query, passing in update space, and then add update user for query. And that's it. You can run it. You can do your add, update, and delete. So now we'll give it a run. Alright, so I'm going to switch over to user info. I'm going to take a couple of guys in here. I already have Luke Skywalker down here. I'm going to delete him. Delete successful. It refreshed. And Luke is gone. I'm going to take Han Solo. I'm going to change him around. So I'm going to make him into Luke Skywalker. And we'll say Luke at sky.com. Address will be 123 Sith Lane. Age will be 34. Let's put him on, well, Han right now is on a flight number 4. Let's put him on a flight on Aer Lingus. We'll hit update. It said query successful. Did a refresh. So now we have Luke Skywalker here. Right? Now let's add somebody new. So we changed Han. Let's add him back. Oh, we actually did an add by accident. And if we do a refresh here, we now have 2 Luke Skywalkers. So let's fix that. So we know add works. And let's do a Han Solo. So Han at solo.com. We'll say 456 Falcon Way. He's age 38 or 38. Put him on a flight. Let's put him on the WestJet flight. Hit update. Query successful. So now Han Solo's up and running. Refresh works. Now, only final thing I'll mention about this, we're basically done this application here. But the final thing I'll mention is that flight num, this column, you could take it a step further, do a table join to the other table. You can take this any way you want. There's any way you can go with this. All right. So just to summarize what we did, we basically learned about the connected model. It's very similar to Java Enterprise, the way they do it in there, right? But we basically are using the SQL command object. We're using the SQL connection object. So we're basically doing the what I consider the long way to connecting to a database, getting the data, doing an insert, update, and delete for the database, right? And we learned about using tab control to put everything onto one app. Our next app, we're going to move away from this. We're going to go into something called a disconnected model, and this will be a lot easier than what we did today. We'll be doing what took us a few hours to do. We'll be doing with a few button clicks. It'll be that simple to do. So we'll be able to reduce a lot of the work involved by using the disconnected model.